And good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the finance panel meeting. It's a hybrid meeting. Some of us are here in the chamber and quite a few online. So this finance panel is the last step in the scrutiny process of the budget. And we are looking at the budget that was presented to the Cabinet middle of the month. And then it'll be going to full council at the end of February. So this is the last day of January. Spring is coming, so everybody's got a spring in their step, apart from the finance team. So first item on the agenda is apologies. Do we have any, Kath?
Yep, Chair, we have got apologies from councillors Chris Walsh, Elwyn Vaughan, and Cabinet Member David Selby. I know the leader, I think he was going to try and join, will be leaving after about 20 minutes, half an hour. We've also got apologies from Emma Palmer, Chief Exec, and Sharon Powell, Head of Children's Services.
Thanks, Kath. Item 2, declarations of interest. Any received? Please make us aware of those as we go through the agenda if you perceive some sort of interest. Item 3, disclosures of party whips. No. And then item 4, the main bit of the agenda is the draft medium-term financial strategy for 25 to 2030 and the draft budget for 25-26 and also the capital programme for the next 5 years as well. Can I ask the Cabinet Member for Finance, Councillor David Thomas? Welcome, David. If you want to give us an overview at the start.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, everybody. You've obviously got the budget pack in front of you, and I think it's about 300 pages or thereabouts in total if you take all sections into consideration. So what I'm going to attempt to do is to give a very, very brief introduction, just highlighting some of the key points within the budget and how we've got to where we are. There are going to be a number of officers and portfolio holders with us for the relative services. So if at the end of my brief introduction, when we go into questions, if there are any service-specific questions, I'm sure they'll be able to pick those up. And if there are any general finance questions, then obviously myself and finance officers will pick those up. So if you recall back in the late summer, early autumn, all the indications were that we were going to receive a flat cash settlement for the 25-26 budget. But as a result of the UK budget in October, there was some extra money went out to the devolved governments, and that resulted with Welsh local authorities having an increase within their revenue support grants, which equated to an average of 4.3%. In Powis's case, it equated to 3.3%. The lowest awarded was 2.6% for Monmouthshire, and the highest was 5.6% for Newport, so the average was 4.3%. That left an aggregate extra AEF for Powis of £250.1 million, which was a £7.9 million increase. And in 24-25, the base increased because extra money was allocated for pensions, teachers, and NJC pay, which equated to an additional 2.7 onto the 24-25 base budget. And that transferred over into the base for 25-26. So in fact, we ended up with an increase of 6%, which equated to £14.3 million. But you need to bear in mind that 2.7% of that was already taken up with projected pension and teachers and NJC pay for 25-26. So the 24-25 base budget was 341.6 million, and the budget required for 25-26 was 365.8 million pound, and that was after taking out 12.3 million pounds worth of efficiencies and savings. So that left a budget gap of 24.151 million pounds. So what the budget proposes is that we bridge that gap by the 14.3 million pound increase in the settlement and an 8.9% increase in council tax, which equates to 9.83 million pound. just with regard to the 8.9% increase, obviously, I think you'll find that a number of local authorities in Wales are setting relatively high income council tax increases, particularly the rural authorities, because they've tended to end up with the lower end of the settlement. But we do recognise that we've just come through, and indeed we're still in, to a certain extent, a cost of living crisis, and there's a lot of pressure on our residents. So within the budget, we've strengthened the council tax reduction scheme, and we've got £13 million built into the budget to help alleviate the pressures of the council tax increase on our most vulnerable residents. And in fact, I think the latest figures suggest that only about 53%, only about 47% of residents will pay full council tax. 53% will have some form of reduction. So just some highlights within the budget. Schools that are getting an increase of £7.4 million. That equates to 8.3%, and that'll fully fund the school's formula, and that's above the general increase in the RSG. The risk budget is going to be maintained at £3 million, but I have to point out that there's a significant level of risk built into the budget, and we've got £10.6 million worth of pressures held at risk. And looking forward, within the FRM, the budget gap over the next 5 years equates to approximately £39 million. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, David, for that overview. I understand, Jane, as Section 151, you don't want to say anything at the moment, but you're here to answer questions. And at the start, I should have also welcomed Lynn Hamilton, the Chair of Governance and Finance, and her fellow committee member, John Brotingham, to this panel. I know they're here as observers, but I would like to hope you, both of you, would feel able to take full part in the discussion. Because, John, you got some views on the pension elements within these papers. So hopefully you can remind me or jump in at any moment when you want to pick up those. Thank you both for joining us. Right, who would like to start the discussion here on the budget? We do need to keep it at a fairly high level. Generally, we've dealt with the services at the individual scrutiny level, scrutiny groups. There have been 3 previous scrutiny meetings, so we don't want to dive too deeply into each service, but keep it fairly high. I do want to look at the risk within the budget and also the long-term consequences of this. And when we look at the FRM going forward, is there anybody who wants to? Oh, Jeremy, Councillor Jeremy.
Well, for me, it looks like we're passing on the 13 million gap in our business, basically. So what is the projected income going to be, council tax going to be in 26-27? Because we're passing the 13 million on top of another deficit another year. To me, that looks like it's going to be a huge increase in council tax.
Jane, do you want to look at around the FRM really, isn't it?
Yes, I can do. In terms of the medium-term financial strategy, the projections going forward are based on modelling of a 5% increase in council tax. That's what's included in our medium-term financial strategy on an annual basis. If we look at the budget gap that still exists in terms of the plan, if we're unable to bridge that gap with cost reductions, which of course we will be looking to deliver on, to bridge that gap down, that is when you look to your other sources of income in terms of bridging that gap. And just to give people a flavour of how much council tax you would need to bridge that gap, it's about £1 million for every percentage increase that we raise. So if you're looking at the forward budget projections, where we're talking about 10-11 million pounds worth of pressures still in those future years, then to bridge that gap with council tax alone, you'd be looking at percentages of 10-11% to do that, which obviously that's not sustainable going forward. So obviously the budget gap really has to be focused on being resolved through those cost efficiencies and reductions in terms of the delivery of our services.
Come on then to item 3.76, delivering the budget gap. It says improvement in contract management, 2.923 million. Can someone give us a little breakdown on where that is coming from? Because it's a significant sum.
It's broken down in terms of the savings that you have in a lot of detail. So there will be a number of savings that actually factor into that figure. And that will be where we are managing our contracts effectively, trying to drive down the level of inflation that we have to apply to those contracts, looking to see across the council where we can make inroads into those significant contract costs and actually reduce them. So there will be a number of factors across the very detailed cost savings that are attributable to sort of that contract management element. So I haven't got them in front of me in terms of the exact breakdown, but we can provide you with that so you can see every figure that's dealing and totaling that amount.
But for me, basically what we're saying, and I'm pleased to see that we're going to tighten down on contract management. I'd like to see how we're going to go about it, because making a statement is one thing, identifying them, but the council is innate in going over budget on contracts at all times. So to have faith in that, I got to be honest, until I see the process and how you're going to manage your budgets differently, I've got little faith in that. I don't mean to be disrespectful to anyone here, but I have to be true. Then you come into the next one, increased income. Well, we can all put a projected increased income down. I've run several businesses and I can put my projections down, but that's 5.7 million. Can someone tell me how we're going to get projected at the income of 5.7 million, please?
That's based on full cost recovery and inflation increases.
David, can you press your light?
So it's based on full cost recovery and inflationary increases. In some cases, there are instances where the increase might be just above inflation, but that's the figure that's overall
In
services.
recovery of what costs? Because we're making more new money. This is now. So where is the new money coming from to get the full costs? I don't understand where the full amount is. The 5.7 is coming from.
We're already raising about £80 million per annum in income charges, and obviously if you're going to
Charges. That's what.
Fees and charges.
Pardon?
Fees and charges, and they're set out in the fees and charges register that accompanies the budget pack. So the lengthy document, because there are a number of services that we are able to charge for. So we've looked at increasing the charges wherever possible in line with inflation, or at least to achieve that full cost recovery. So again, they're included in that complete breakdown of savings, and they will be representative across the whole of the council. So there are numerous ways, but we also, as part of building those into the budget plan, undertake a degree of sensitivity analysis. So if you're increasing your charges, you have to be aware of how that impacts on take-up and so forth. So all of those factors would have been considered in coming to the figures that you see included there. Can I just pick up on contract management as well? Because a number of years ago, I think it was highlighted that the council wasn't the best at managing its contracts. And we clearly responded to that, and we have nearly all of the officers that are actually involved in managing contracts have now undergone a training regime, and that will be very much dependent on their level of input into that contract management, and there are different levels of training that people need to have undertaken, and the take-up for that has been really good. We have some stats that again we can share with you around that, but that has very much been part of the driver to improve those skills across the organisation.
I'd love to see that, because believe it or not, contracts is my forte. I love contracts, and it's something I seem to be quite happy with. But then the other one is workforce changes, 1.98, well, best part of 2 million. What actually are we going to do dramatically to bring £2 million worth of extra changes, please?
Again, that's looking across the whole organisation, and that will be where we are reducing workforce in some areas. That can be through restructures, it can be through vacancy management. So every time a post comes up as a service level and as a head of service level particularly, you would review what that post was delivering. Is it the post that we need going forward before any sort of recruitment is considered. So there are, again, across many services looking to bring into being some transformational change in terms of digitizing processes, using artificial intelligence, all of those things. And that will enable us to reduce the level of staffing that we need across the organisation. And if we can manage that through that vacancy management and staff turnover, it reduces the need to make redundancies across the organisation. So yes, that figure represents those staffing changes that are happening through next financial
So
year.
if people don't retire, like you think they're going to retire, how can you hit that then?
Those are already accounted for, and each service knows how they're going to deliver those. So we already have the detail to back that up.
You know, that's lovely. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jane. So if you could provide the breakdown of those improved contract managements to Kath, that'd be really helpful. She circulated around the committee. The risk cost increases. The general assumption is it's the cost reflects the cost of delivery. The charge reflects the cost of delivery, but there are certain areas that is limited by legislation, such as domestic air and that areas there. And the Welsh Government have decided not to increase the level of charging in there. Is £100 a week, is it, or £100 a week for Doncaster? But I assume the charges register has been looked at by the various scrutiny meetings. I don't know if there's something been raised and concerns about those various charges in the various scrutiny committees. I haven't seen anything, to be honest. But so I assume they're acceptable. But can I go? We've got Gareth Ratcliffe online. Gareth.
Thank you very much, Aled. Yes, you've excuse me. You've actually covered part of my point around cost pressures and social care and the caps. I'm sure it's been covered within the scrutiny committees, but looking at the cost pressures paper going forward in there are a number of areas around schools, education, and also social care that the cost pressures are within 1 year of the paper. But obviously the paper in front of is 5 years. I've just wondered how officers, how confident they are that we're not going to get to year 2, year 3, and actually the cost pressures have been missed on this paper, that actually our deficit figures that we're looking around the 16 million, 12 million, actually going to be far more than that, because obviously the impact of social care and the cost recovery is going to be ever rising, as we're always talking about, and there needs to be a question around the Welsh Government around that, but also the talking about staffing and staffing levels. If we're cutting back, especially around social care, the impact that comes from that later on, which could add to more cost. So sometimes actually reducing staff is going to cost you more money in the long term. I'm just wondering if they're benchmarking those against it.
David, or who would like to pick that up? Jane, it's about sustainable powers as well. It's to some degree, isn't it?
It is. If I pick up on the cost pressures, and yes, it's a 5-year plan. It's a 5-year plan that we look to populate as much as we possibly can. But with any budget, you are looking at estimates. I think what we have to be assured of is that the estimates being used in that modelling are as robust as they can be. But as we all know, economic factors and many factors outside of our own control can impact on demand levels, but also on inflation, interest rates, and so forth. So we will have modelled based on our reasonable assumptions. Can I guarantee there will be nothing changed? No, absolutely not. But I think we also recognise within that longer term plan that we may not have captured everything. In fact, I'm certain we won't have captured everything. And we do hold £1 million within that overall budget as potential pressures that we haven't necessarily identified as yet. So that's already built into the plan. And then as we get more assurance, we take that figure down, but put it back into the services where we do get more certainty. So yeah, it's at this point in time, but I can guarantee you it will change as we move through the next 5 years.
Thanks, Jean. Gareth, did you want to respond to that? Oh, Gareth,
No,
sorry.
thank you. I think mine was more of a statement of, I think we talk about this every year, obviously around that cost pressure and the impact of this budget and the future figures that may come forward. Like I said, the question around staffing, I don't know if it's this place here because it's obviously we're looking at a high level, but I have got concerns around staffing, around social care, and if you cut back too far, it has a knock-on effect, which bed blocks and obviously care and everything else that goes around that. So sometimes a reduction in staff actually can be more detrimental to cost.
Thanks, Gareth. We're fortunate enough to have Nina here in this chamber with us. Nina.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Gareth, for raising those concerns. We've been very careful when we've looked at the staffing and the cost efficiency savings that have been put forward within this draft budget to make sure that we are not having that very impact, that we are protecting the front line and those services which are so important for the people of Powys, etc. So just to give you that assurance that we have absolutely looked carefully at the positions and the staffing changes that are being proposed to make sure that there's a minimal impact on people. And of course, as you said, the delivery of services and the impact that might have in the future. Thank you.
Yeah, can I just come back on one quick thing, and that's related to obviously our partners such as Health and how they fit into this, because obviously we may be able to deliver our services, but if we are unable to support Health in delivering their services and vice versa, that does have an impact as well. I know of people who are waiting for social workers to be assigned, and they're stuck in hospitals or care facilities that obviously we're not picking up the bill. The Health Board are, so obviously there is an impact there.
Nina.
Yeah, Chair, thank you, Councillor Gareth, and just to assure you that the impact on partners and the whole health and care system, exactly as you said, has been really carefully considered as well. So yeah, no, we recognise the importance and the role we play within that health and social care system, and you know it's an area that we're looking to invest and improve. We're delivering 2,000 extra dom care hours per week at the moment, to where we were in April of this year, to help assist making sure we get people out of hospital as quickly as possible and to get support that system. So just know, absolutely assure you that we are taken into account. And I meet regularly with my colleagues and counterparts in Health. We discuss potential changes in terms of cost efficiency savings, but also improvements, and we want to transform together as well. So a really close relationship working with Powys Teaching Health Board colleagues, and we have a joint leadership team as well where we meet monthly, where we're having those discussions as well at a strategic and high level. Thank you.
Thanks, Nina. I can see Shan Cox is online and also Sharon. Shan, did you want to say a couple of words before Sharon comes in?
Thank you, Councillor Alid, and thank you, Councillor Gareth, for raising those issues as well. And I would just only add that much of the work that we're doing that's unfolding at the moment, some of it's incorporated in the savings proposal, some of it's ongoing work that's happening outside of that, is all about partnership working, and the locality-based model will have as its core partnership working not only with the Health Board but with the third sector, with community groups on the ground, with residents on the ground. So that's a thread running through everything that we do, that we're collaborating on this to assess what the needs are, to map and gap our communities, to look at where things are missing and how we can collaborate together to fill those gaps, reducing the cost to all of us by working closer together, sharing resources, sharing assets. So you'll see those threads woven into everything that we're doing at the moment, which will mitigate the problem that you've raised as well.
Thank you very much, Shan. Your director mentioned 2,000 hours dom care additional. What does that what is that in number of packages being provided on average? I know it's quite variable, but typically, how many packages is 2,000 hours additional dom care support?
Is that to me, Councillor Alid?
Well, yes, or Sharon can. I don't mind.
I can't answer that question, because packages vary in size, obviously. So I would actually have to hand that over to Sharon. No, if you wanted a little bit more detail, but of course, some packages are more hours than other packages, and depending on need and travel, etc.
Of course, Sharon.
Thank you, Chair. To answer the domiciliary care package, as Councillor Shan has just said, it's really difficult to quantify because the different packages will be made up of different hours. But what I can say is we've significantly reduced the number of people awaiting packages of care by probably around 80 people over the last year. So there's been a significant reduction in those numbers of people awaiting packages. And to go back to Councillor Gareth's point, it is absolutely crucial. If we don't view this as a whole system, both us and health will fail. We meet on a daily basis with partners in health, looking at that system flow, making sure that we've got the right resources in the right place, and making sure that we're not duplicating our roles, so that we actually are as efficient as possible. And we're looking at ways that we can co-locate, aligning ourselves with the work in the community hospitals, but and some of the aspirations for the future would be that we would align ourselves with the GP clusters as well. This will be pivotal, as Councillor Shan said, delivering the locality model.
Thank you very much, Sharon. Just before I bring Councillor Peets in, the saving of reference by Jeremy, contract man, no, workforce changes just under £2 million. That doesn't include the schools delegated budget, does it? Because Councillor Pete for education did say that schools have now aligned the staffing structure according to the funding formula, and there shouldn't be any in-year overspends there. Are any school, I mean, education and staffing involved in that 1.9 million, well, almost £2 million?
Come in. No, they won't be captured at the school's delegated level, because obviously those plans aren't submitted till later on. But then those plans will be reflected in schools' individual delegated budget. So yes, it isn't included in that figure, no.
Yeah, just for clarity, because almost half the staff employed by Powers are within schools. Well,
They are.
Ballpark figure. Thank you, Jane. Councillor Pete.
Yeah, thanks, Jack. I just had two questions, if I may, which I guess revolve around the theme of risk. And the first one is related back to the ongoing saga of car parking charges. And I know the Cabinet are reconsidering the recommendations that came forward from the working group, where the number one priority was the reintroduction of the 1 hour tariff in the long stay car parks. So I guess the first question is if Cabinet did agree to finally do that, is there a contingency somewhere in the budget to cover that cost? And then looking at paragraph 3.81 in the report, which talks about the 3.5 million national insurance cost. If I've read that right, it looks like we put a charge of 3.5 million in the budget, but we have assumed we will get that fully reimbursed. So in effect, nil impact on the budget. It does say that we've assessed the risk of that as part of the budget. But I guess, again, do we have some sort of provision around somewhere in case our assessment's wrong and we don't get the whole 3.5 million? Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Pete. Who'd like to take that up? Do we have the portfolio holder for? Is Jackie here? Sorry, Councillor Jackie. No.
Yes, indeed.
Councillor Jackie, would you like to address the point on car parking first?
Yes, I wish I could update Councillor Peter on this one. We should have been in a position to update you by today, Peter, but we had to postpone or defer the meeting that we were going to have on the 17th of January because we couldn't get all the people in the room that we needed. But the discussions are open. I know the Cabinet have not made any decisions on those car parking charges. So yes, you are right. There is a risk there. But I'm assuming that by the time we get through, I don't think we would have had the discussion. I can't remember the date. I think it might be just before the main full council on the budget is to be discussed. I think we may have had that meeting, so I might be able to update you further there. I don't think it's a huge risk, but yes, it is still a risk. I hope that fulfills the question that you've asked.
Yeah,
Keith,
could I
would you come
just
back on
pop back
that?
in, Chair? Yeah. Yeah, no, thanks, Councillor Jackie. And it's sort of like does, and I understand that you've not made the decision yet. I guess the question was just around making sure that there is, I guess, a reserve or some money around a provision if you do agree to reintroduce that tariff. So
Maybe I could ask Jane to clarify that, or Matt. Both of them obviously have got a better knowledge of where we are with the risk budget and how that's been set up than I have. But yes, I'd be very happy to bring in either of those to help out on that question.
Thank you, Jackie. Jane is poised to come in. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we don't hold contingencies within the budget itself. We do hold a risk budget. We have a £3 million risk budget included in our base budget that helps us manage all the risks around the budget. And we also hold reserves that are another key part of managing that budget risk. So we don't set aside specifically for each individual one. It is part of that whole. We do identify some more specifically, but they would tend to be those that are really substantial in terms of the plan. And we do hold some specific reserves. We've held a pay reserve, as you know, for many, many years that helps us offset our assumptions in terms of that level of pay that may actually be approved. So I hope that gives you some information. I'm not sure. I think Councillor Davis is going to come in on the national insurance more specifically, but
well, yes, I'd like to quite an in-depth discussion on national insurance because carries quite a bit of risk, is highlighted in education of the day. Just quickly, the risk budget, it's not part of the general reserve, is it? So it doesn't come towards the 4% at all. Yeah. Just for clarity, the 4% is still in there, even if that risk budget is used. Thank you. Sorry, David.
Yeah, it's Councillor Peters quite correct, and we're estimating the impact on the budget of the employers' national insurance increase to be about £3.5 million. That's built into the budget, and there's an expectation that we'll receive that funding in round about May next year. There is risk around it because we're presuming we're going to receive 100%, but as you correctly say, Chair, that's not guaranteed. And obviously, we'll have to look at things like the risk budget if there is a shortfall there.
It was highlighted education, learning and skills scrutiny. The intervention rate could be as low as 70%. So, or at the worst, and hopefully it's near the 100%. But we've also got spending review in the spring as well before we reach May, and there's probably a little bit of uncertainty around that, Jane.
I think that's true. There is a lot of uncertainty around the national insurance. You know, I think even from a Welsh national level, nobody is absolutely certain as yet in terms of what that allocation may be from the UK government. And we won't have that clarity. We were told May initially, but I think it may even be later than that before we know exactly where we will be with that. And we had a similar situation with the teacher's pension last year, where again, we were carrying a significant level of risk because we had the costs were being incurred, but we didn't know what funding we were getting at that stage either. In terms of national insurance, similarly for the pension, it depends how it's allocated as well. Whether, you know, there's a lot of debate, I think, at the moment around which costs will be covered, because you have national insurance costs that impact on our direct workforce employed by the council, but we also have national insurance impact on the provider market as well. And we're not clear at this stage what exactly will be supported. So we are waiting for further guidance from Welsh Government around that. And it'll be some time, unfortunately, before I think we have that clarity.
I suppose in many ways it could come down to how you define a local authority worker. And so there is a little bit of risk there. I wouldn't see it as being down as low as 70%. I think 80%, 80 to 100% within that bracket.
That's a sort of ballpark. Have your providers quantified the extent of the pressure that national insurance will impose on them? Have you had much discussion on that level?
There are discussions, and I think, you know, some providers are telling us their cost increases are in the region of 10% to cover national insurance, real living wage, all of those pressures that fall on them individually. But that is subject to negotiation, obviously, but that I know that's the information we're getting back from some providers.
And those providers you're talking about, what sort of quantum of contracts are they dealing with?
Some of
10%
them will
what,
be
basically?
quite big in terms of home care, residential care, as well as the dom care market as well. So, you know, we are talking about significant contracts.
Right. Can you give me a ballpark figure of that sum?
I think our estimates are saying that we'll be in the region of, for national insurance alone, over 3 million pressure in the external provider market, in addition to the 3 point whatever million it is within the council's workforce as well. So it is a significant pressure on us.
Okay. Thank you very much. Sorry, Pete, did you want to come back on the national insurance?
No, I just had another question, if that was okay, Chair. Yeah. Councillor David, I think earlier mentioned that only 47% of residents pay the full council tax, and I understand that the 8.9% increase that we have before us is based on the fact, or takes account, that only 47% pay the full council tax. Again, I guess just with my risk hat on, is how up to date is that 47%? Because if that's based on, say, a couple of years old data, and we only end up with, say, 42% paying this time around, we could be in big trouble.
Yeah, and plus you could I'd also address it used to be about just over £30 million in quantum, didn't it, a few years ago, but it's probably gone up significantly. But can you also address whether the council only gives or discounts where it has to, according to legislation, or is the council more generous than it needs to be?
Well, obviously, you've got the statutory schemes in a sense. The council tax reduction scheme, you've got the single person allowance, single occupancy, disability allowances. On top of that, you've got discretionary allowances as well that we determine at a local authority level. But with regard to the 47%, that's a fairly up-to-date figure. Obviously, there are different levels within different wards. Some are going to be higher, some are going to be lower. But over the authority as a whole, 47% is the most recent figure we've got, and it's fairly up to date. 53% do receive some form of support.
Yes, and so it's important that the council taxpayer has a responsibility around that as well.
Yeah. So
if the status of that household changes, whether it becomes a two-person household or remains as a one-person household, it's important that those council taxpayers do that. Around the discretionary elements, how much does that discretionary element cost the council?
I haven't got an exact figure for that.
You have to come back, okay. And that's whose decision is it around those discretionary elements? Is it the cabinet's decision how that is dealt with, or?
Ultimately, it comes to me as the portfolio holder after an assessment by officers, and that they make a recommendation, and I'd look into that recommendation and the evidence backing it up.
But the vast majority of that's whatever it is, £30-something million is governed by legislation, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think with the discretionary scheme, you know, anybody claiming that they've got to be in very, very dire straits, for want of a better term, you know, financially.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you, David. Pete, did you want to respond to any of that at all?
No, I think that answered it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. There's no hands up at the moment. I'll just dive. Spoke too soon.
Thank you,
Thank you, Gareth.
Yeah.
Gareth is the governance and audit rep on the finance panel. So
yeah,
welcome,
and I'm a resident of Cardiff, and recently I called in my library to get some green bags because we're not as progressed as as Powys. We don't segregate our recycled waste. But what was there was a council's consultation on their budget proposals, which gave a very interesting overview, a short overview of it. And the interesting thing is the categories that Councillor Jeremy quoted of how the gaps could be closed are very similar to Cardiff, and I think local authorities around Wales are all pretty much in a similar predicament. The only one difference is they had a heading called service change proposals. But when you look at that, that's very similar to what Powys is doing on Sustainable Powys Initiative. So my question really is, are those categories which have changed from previous years, are they an emerging set of performance indicators when you add them all together, which will be able to assess how well, once the proposals come out in Sustainable Powys, how well Sustainable Powys is doing? And going forward, we can use these as a consistent set of criteria to judge that progress.
Jane.
I think they will form part of that. I think, though, as the specific proposals at a service level about what those services may look like in the future under Sustainable Powys, I think each of those projects will have a set of criteria as well, or a set of performance data that we will need to monitor to make sure that whatever we deliver is aligned to what we expected or not, as the case may be, and then you're able to flex it. But I think we have to be clear, and I don't think we're necessarily there yet, but I think we will have to have that set performance data, what impact that's going to have. But also, if decisions aren't made and we're unable to deliver on that, what impact that will have too in terms of Sustainable Powys and being able to be a Sustainable Powys.
Sure. Thanks.
Thank you, Gareth. John, I can see your hand is up. Is it about Sustainable Powys? Because I'd like to explore this a little bit more, really. John, you're muted at the moment. John Brottingham, sorry.
No, it isn't, Aled. I put my hand up because I thought the discussion had exhausted itself. But my queries are on the longer term, so perhaps you could continue.
Okay, can we just explore the Sustainable Powys a little bit more, because it's been an important plank in the current council's way forward. It was reimagining Powys, and now it's badged as Sustainable Powys, looking into the long term. And you know, the FRM plays an important part of that. Before we come to that, sorry, David. The third line up on the FRM, just for clarity, I don't quite understand this. It's got 2.8 transfers, 3.3, then 1.1. What is, can you explain that, or Jane? Sorry, on the FRM, I don't know which page it is. I just print off the FRMs all the time, and it's part of the it's like an appendice here, usually.
Are we looking at Appendix B?
Yeah, I'm sure it is.
Remind me what the question
Appendix
was.
B is page 73. I found it.
Yes. What was the question? Sorry.
The third from bottom line above the it's the settlement line is 2.8 transfers, 3.3, and then 1.1. Assume the 1.1 is the 4 columns from 26 onwards. But what's this 2.8? Is that transfers into this current year's budget plus council tax?
No, let me
support.
explain. I think so. You'll recall Councillor David said right at the start, in terms of the settlement, we've had some settlement baselined that we're getting in grant for this year.
Yeah,
That represents the
That's what I meant,
2.8.
this year's.
Yeah,
Mm.
so that's the 2.8
Yeah.
that feeds into 25, 26. Then you've got the 3.3, which is
Next year's
the
settlement.
next year's increase. And the 1.3 is our best guess
For future
for
years.
future, and that's based on economic factors and some
No.
reasoning in the OBR report as well around economic growth and potentially what local government or public sector settlements might look like going forward.
Yes, I assume that's, so the top line of last year's end date was £341 million. So it's those two figures on top of that,
Yes.
the 341. Okay,
Yes.
right. And just before looking at numbers on last year's resource model, this time last year, the bottom line there, funding shortfall is all wrong, isn't it?
On last year's FRM.
Yes, because I like to compare one year's FRM to the next year's FRM. And
It will be different because it will be based on assumptions.
No, it's
won't
just
it?
plain wrong, sorry.
Oh, well, I'd have to have a look. I haven't
Printed
got
out.
that one in front of
Oh,
me. so-
I did raise it with somewhere with Anne, but having said that, the assumptions in last year's have swung huge swing to this year. It's 3.3% assumption going forward, isn't it? Or around the funding. What gives you the certainty that it's going to be that much? I know it's a judgment.
It is a judgment, isn't it? I mean, the 3.3 is what we've been given now, so we
Oh, yeah,
know
that's fairly.
that's
okay.
in terms of the 1.3, we still do the scenario modelling. So we look at worst case and best case. The 1.3 is, as I said, based on those OBR, so the Office of Budget Responsibility projections, and working with Wales Fiscal Analysis, you know, looking at everything in the round, which is a big task, as you appreciate. It's their assumptions around what public sector funding might look like more generally. So it is an average. We have no more detail than that. And as we do every year, we plead for multi-year settlements to give us a little bit more assurance about what that might look like. As Councillor David said at the beginning, we were basing our projections based on that analysis back early last year, where we were being told it was much bleaker than where we've ended up. So, you know, the national picture continues to change and continues to influence our modelling. And without any degree or more clarity than that, we have to work with what we best know.
Yeah. No, I do accept it's a judgment call, and you take advice from all areas, don't you, David?
Yeah, I think it does make that clear in the report, actually, that a lot of these estimates are based on analysis by Wales Fiscal Analysis going forward. So anything can change. Obviously, there are exogenous impacts that can come down on that. And as far as the actual value of any settlement is concerned, obviously, if you see movement within interest rates downwards or inflation downwards, the real value then is going to increase. But generally speaking, the forecasts going forward are looking very, very grim indeed. There was some indication that Welsh governments might be prepared in next year going forward to give us some multi-year settlements. But again, you've got an election coming up in the Senate next year, so we don't know what's going to happen around that. So.
And they obviously dependent on UK government giving them a multi-year settlement as well.
Yeah, and I think that's where they're getting a bit of the confidence from, but we'll have to wait and see.
Okay. But coming back to the sustainable powers, when you look forward, you know, the sustainable powers is supposed to try and get the council to somewhere where you know it's sustainable. But when you look in the future years, the gap is, you know, cumulative gap is getting bigger and bigger and bigger, as it has done in previous years, and it doesn't seem to be. Perhaps this is unfair. Is the sustainable powers effective in delivering and closing that gap? Because we saw the table highlighted earlier on, the transformation element was 330-ish K, wasn't 330,000. What's your assessment of sustainable powers?
Ultimately, the long-term aim of sustainable powers would be to sort of reduce that gap, but at the same time, the gap itself is based on what the settlements are. But what's absolutely essential within the sustainable powers program is that it's a program of change, and change the way we deliver services, and they become more efficient. And that was hopefully going to impact the overall spending power, for want of a better term, of the AF.
But the gap each year is not dependent on the funding to some degree, is it? The gap halfway down the page on the FRM is quite significant, and in July, when services assess their next year's ask for the budget, that gap always explodes, isn't it? It really expands, and clearly there has to be pushback against that. But it's hard to see that the sustainable powers is delivering for our powers. Can you mention particular schemes that have really changed how a service is delivered, or even if a service has been stopped? Or
I think the changes in the fostering service are a perfect example, actually, of that they just introduced the sustainable powers in action. But coming back to the budget gap, what's without doubt is if we don't apply change the way we're delivering service, the gap is going to get bigger. So the first thing we've got to do is to stabilise that trend, and we'll do that through sustainable powers. And going forward, then I'd like to think that as the services become more efficient, and as the impacts of exogenous factors hitting the authority reduce, then the gap itself will start to reduce, and we can become more sustainable going forward.
I'm not sure how big an impact on the overall budget the fostering service will deliver. I know it's extremely important, but then another big plank of the sustainable powers model was the leisure centres, and that's sort of hit the buffers and been kicked into long grass, and that again is not that big element in the budget. The big two elements are delegated budget schools and social services, both adults and children, particularly adults at the moment, which, as you can see from this budget, is making a huge demand on forward budgets. It's 12% increase in. So is it, you would hope sustainable powers would be having a big impact on the big budgets.
We've got a new initiative developing within adult social care that I'm sure that Nina would be more than happy to tell you about.
Well, if you can keep it at a fairly high level, don't go into the detail. I'm sure that's for the scrutiny.
Yeah, no, thank you, Chair. No, I'm happy just to do high level, kind of tell you that we're currently doing an adult social care diagnostic at the moment, which is a really deep dive, intensive 3-month period looking across adult social care. So what we're doing within January has been analysing, deep dive analysing all the data, what it tells us. In February, it's all about engagement, looking at where the opportunities are, working with frontline practitioners, and that's not just in social care, but across our partners internally and externally in health and the third sector, with then the case for change being developed throughout March. So a really intensive key part of work, which is going to be feeding in sustainable powers moving forward. And of course, what we also have coming in the next couple of months is also looking at our care home estate moving forward, as well as our day opportunities and work, leisure and learning. So there's a lot of work coming through for sustainable powers, and you'll see that coming forward in the next few months.
And then understand Welsh Government helping support this as well.
Yes, we got support Welsh Government and Welsh Local Government Association as well, which is really positive. It's quite exciting.
Thank you, David. Jeremy.
What does sick pay cost in the council across the board? Because we never seem to touch on this, but it always seems to be quite a high factor which never actually shows up on any budget. And I think it should be showing up on a budget so we have an understanding, because if it is untenable and it's out of control, which I don't know, but it's not being shown, and I think it is high risk.
From memory, it does vary quite considerable. Dom care services and social services have to have a different view on sick pay, on sickness, because of the vulnerable population you're dealing with. But Jane, you got figures there.
I've got them somewhere and I need to find them, but I'll come back to you now during the meeting. But the sickness is a part of any workforce, isn't it? It's the degree and the level of sickness that we have to monitor, and we do that on a monthly basis. Services will monitor it more routinely. Part of the performance reviews that happen quarterly with Cabinet and with the portfolio holders and the services look at sickness levels at each individual service. So I look at it for corporate services, corporate leadership team, look at it across the organisation. And actually the levels of sickness across our workforce are below of many other organisations in Wales. I will find you the exact figures so that I can tell you what those are. But no, we are comfortable in terms of the level of sickness that we do have. But some services will need to look at it in a little bit more detail and perhaps look to see if they can bring it down. But our average is well below the average elsewhere.
Average with others is an irrelevant thing. It's like if you go to school with your child and they say he's top of the class. If you've got a class full of people like me and non-academics who are dull as dishwater, then it's a meaningless thing being top of the class. It's only irrelevant to what you get to, what exams you're going to get to. So what others do or don't do is an irrelevant stat in for me. What I'm saying is, what is the cost to us as an organisation for sick pay? And have we doing something to look at? Because I'm aware that some sick is being, personally, I can only say my own view, is being abused in certain places. And what are we going to do to put that right? The other thing is, I come into the building today, I understand that we're supposed to be working from 3 days a week into the offices here, and I look around the offices I walk around. There must be an awful lot of people missing today, or they've all come in on other days, but I can't see that the numbers actually stack up, and which is going to have a great impact on our next generation of officers, because they're failing to get the people, the knowledge of the people who've been here for a significant length of time. So they're not going to gain that knowledge, which is again going to impact on what we're doing, which is going to cost us more money in the long run. So I'd like to see, I think we got this name sustainable powers. What we should be saying is achievable powers, because we seem to have a pipe dream, a lot of stuff that we're going to do. And the cost of paying people to look into this when we need to be managing the business, I understand and I agree with David, we have to alter the way we work. But we're still in this dream of we got these things that we want to achieve, like having someone in to do a car parking review. It's obscene. I've got to be honest, you're paying 50,000 for that when we're getting officers on 100,000 a year and they can't do a car park review. You have to stand and ask the question of where are we coming from here? And there's lots of things. It seems we hide behind these people. We bring people in to do the job that we haven't got the stomach for. Well, I've got to be honest, with that level, you need to be able to make them decisions. And if you can't, then that's not a problem. Drop back to a level which is more becoming. But we seem to let people bring in people to all the time to make these things. We're bringing an expert in. Why are we bringing experts in? We've got experts in the field. They've been here for years. We don't need these people to come in and tell us how to run the job. What we need to do is make the decisions and just justify them. Sometimes they're going to be wrong, but more often than not, they're going to be right. But we'll save another £1 million there.
Thanks, Jeremy. Do you want to respond?
Yeah, I was just going to say
before
very briefly on the consultancy fees. I think we're actively engaged in a process where going forward we will reduce our consultancy fees. But just coming back to the sickness issue, every organisation has got a sickness issue, and it does cost money. But unfortunately, it's there, and you've got to address it. It's got to be controlled, and you're quite right in that respect. And there is a sickness policy, and staff managers do abide by that with return to work interviews, etc., etc. And if I can give you some assurance in this, so much as I did attend an awful lot, if not all, of the service self-assessments last year, and the figures I was seeing coming out of those assessments with regard to sickness didn't worry me, in the sense that I was looking at them, and the easiest way I could compare them, as you know, I worked for a very, very large company as a senior manager, and sickness was strictly controlled in that. And a lot of the figures I was seeing were pretty much in line. In some cases, they were slightly over, but again, you've got to take into consideration the type of work that people are doing. So you'd expect to see a higher level of sickness, perhaps in highways operation, because of the nature of the work, than you would in something that's just office-based. But they didn't over-concern me. But I think, as far as the policy, the sickness policy itself is concerned, we've got to get better managers need to be very, very close to that to make sure that, it doesn't get out of hand.
Should we still be part, it should still be on our, sorry, should still be on our budget showing exactly what that amount is and what the risk is. This is what we are, this is what we think we're going to get to, and this is the risk. We don't show it as a risk. And I think
It's normally measured in the number of days full-time equivalents. So I've not actually seen a cost tied to it, so I don't know.
Well, I assume it does get picked up at individual scrutiny performance. So maybe a note to the other chairs around making sure they're monitoring the sickness levels. Jane, if you haven't got the detail now, can you?
No, I was going to say we can share that data.
Yeah.
We have a report. I just can't find it now, but I can share it with you. Can I just pick up too on, Councillor Jeremy picked up on experts and bringing experts in. I think, as a workforce and with the impact of the reductions that we've faced over the last decade, we've reduced our workforce to the minimum levels that we can. And that means we don't necessarily hold some of those expert posts anymore, because it would cost us more to hold them for a whole year when we can bring somebody in just for a few weeks or months to do a specific piece of work. So I think there'll always be a role to have some expert advice at certain points in time. And that can be across any of the services. So I think it's an effective way of managing what we need when we need it. So I just wanted to pick up on that, really.
Thank you, Jane.
Can I say,
I need to bring Gareth. Can I bring Gareth Ratcliffe in first?
Yeah,
and then I'll come back to you, Jeremy. Gareth, you had
Yeah, thank you very much, Chairman. Just coming in on to support Councillor Jeremy. One of the things that used to be scrutiny committee, there were regular updates on sickness absence and type of absence, which was allowed then for them to deep dive into those areas, especially around social care, and also with our frontline staff on highways and stuff like musculoskeletal and everything else like that. Do those reports go to the employment committee now for scrutiny and understanding and development, because they did used to do a benchmark against other local authorities? They looked like there was a bit of a change a number of years ago, and they changed things like managing apples against pears. So I'm just wondering, I know it's not for us as such to get into that detail, but I'm just wondering, is it something that the employment committee should be looking at as a concern from ourselves around lost staff there? Also around reviews. Sickness absence is part and parcel of the business. It happens, but what are our line managers doing? Are they managing sickness correctly? And then are the managers being managed? Those are the kind of questions we need to know as an authority. Are the processes in place? Are they being followed? Because it's all well and good, you can put data onto a piece of paper, it can go to senior managers and it can look all right, but actually is that a true reflection? You've got to have those stops within there. So just supporting Jeremy in those comments there.
Thank you, Gareth. Jeremy, did you want to quickly before?
Yeah. Do we have a checklist when we're going to bring in a so-called expert, and that we hit this, and this is what the criteria is? And secondly, that'd be lovely. I'd love to see that if we have. And secondly, do we then look at what advice we have and then understand whether it's worked or failed? Because I've not come across that either. And I think that's very interesting, because if we're bringing people in, like with the car parking, which now they're not taking any notice of, it's a failure. So we need to review that and understand why we made the decision, how we make sure that that doesn't happen again. Because, a simple thing like car parks, we should never add anyone anyway. Anyway.
Thank you, Jeremy. I'm sure that one will come to the surface again very soon. So we back in the day when I was chair of the Corporate Governance Scrutiny Committee, nobody else remembers that here, but I remember there's regular data coming through around absence and sickness, and so hopefully it does go to various scrutiny committees or the employment committee. Could that be double checked, please, and just so we can have assurance around that. Thank you. Has anybody else got any comments on sustainable powers and progress in developing a powers that will fit within the budget, or a budget or a powers or a council we can afford to run without making difficult changes every year, year on year. No other comments on that? No, I know schools have picked it up to some degree because there's a big area within education and the footprint of our schools across the county. Okay, I'll leave that for now. John Broughtingham, you had your hand up a while ago.
I did. Thank you, Aled. I've got two questions really, and both of them are about the medium-term financial plan. What triggered my interest really was on page 34 of our pack on paragraph 4.11. That paragraph discusses the impact of the pushing back the capital program in schools on the ability for the education department to fulfill its role, I suppose, in a sense. But that drew me then to looking at the finance costs of the borrowing that for our capital program, and I was comparing it with last year, with the budget papers for last year, and the financing costs in every single year from 23-24 up to 28-9, which is as far as they went in those days. The figures in the current budget are very much higher than the figures that were forecast a year ago. In point of fact, by the time you get to 28-29, what was 13.5 million has now become 20.25 million. And what's even more worrying is that the proportion of the net revenue stream that we've got to fund this capital financing has gone up from what was predicted last year to be around just below 4%. It's now going to approach 5.2, 5.3%. Now, in those heady days when I was on this committee and indeed chairing this committee, we got very concerned about the affordability of the capital program. My question really is, are we going to be able to sustain a program of school improvements within a financially viable envelope?
Thank you, John. So this is all about the capital program in future years. Sorry, John, I missed the first figure. The percentage gone up to 5.2, but what was it?
Oh, it was, let me just check. It was 3.7.
3.7, okay.
Yeah.
But
it's gone up. I mean, in absolute value, I mean, the 28-29 figure now is forecast to be 50% higher than it was a year ago.
Yeah, and in the FRM, there's about 2.5 million additional every year.
Yeah, it's if you recall, Aled, because you were on the committee at the time, we were talking about warning and action limits on the proportion of our net revenue stream that was given over to capital funding, and we were talking in those days around about for sort of 5-6% as being the sort of area where we start to get a bit worried about it, to be quite honest with you, and we didn't want to get it creeping up. Perhaps Jane could comment.
Yeah.
Okay.
James is here as well, but if I start, James, and you can fill in anything that I haven't covered. But I mean, that level of commitment from your revenue budget to support capital is significant, at 13 million a year to support our previous capital spend. So it's the borrowing that we've got in place for previous capital spend. We have to be absolutely certain that our revenue budget can support any new capital schemes as we move through the next few years. So we have a capital program that sets out a bit more detail over that period of time, but on an annual basis, we have to review what we are able to deliver within the constraints of our revenue budget. And we've all seen inflation and interest rates stick at that higher level now for a level of time. We were hoping they would have started to drop by now, but obviously that impacts on us as well in terms of any new borrowing that we take out. You know, we're fundamental to that. So we are very aware that we need to have an affordable capital programme. And we are looking at every opportunity before we consider taking out additional borrowing. And that is fundamental to that affordability. And this is why we seek any grant opportunities we can. We hold some projects and we don't take them forward until we can find funding to support them. And this is why we have to release capital receipts across the assets that we don't necessarily need to retain going into the future to enable us to support that capital programme and limit that borrowing. I think members will have had our expert advisor in terms of treasury management, which we do by supporting because we need that expertise, was clear that borrowing should be the last port of call. So we do have to be very mindful. And again, this is where we push quite heavily with Welsh Government in terms of any grant funding that we get. The intervention rates currently for our capital schemes across schools see the council having to make a considerable contribution. We push to see if we can better those intervention rates so there's less reliance on our own funding because revenue is so tightly squeezed. But you're absolutely right, John. We do have to keep a very careful eye on that. Around 4%, I'm feeling comfortable. I think as it starts to creep up, that pressure, you know, really, we do have to consider that very carefully. I don't know if James has got any extra points to make.
James, can you let us know what your title is as well?
James Chappell.
Sorry, oh, James, there you are. Go on, James.
James Chappell, Capital and Financial Planning Accountant. So yes, there has been a huge change. By this time, when we set the budgets last year, and we carried out the forecast last year, we were expecting interest rates to be at least 0.5%, if not more, lower than they currently are. And at that point in time, we were expecting them to be sort of, you know, dropping to a level of below 3%. The latest forecast assumes that we're not going to get any sort of borrowing rates below 4% for a good few years, which is driving up our costs. We've got quite a lot of debt that is sort of at 1 year because we're rolling that until we, because it's at high rates, we're rolling that to hopefully renew at a lower rate in 12 months' time. So that's helping there. And of course, we would have been assuming last year that we'd have been renewing debt as it expires or as it matures at a lower rate than it currently is. Well, than the old debt was at. That's not the case at the minute. We're still renewing at a higher level than we would really like to and anticipated sort of 12 months ago.
Good. James, I'm sorry to interrupt. Can you put some figures on those? When you talk about the lower rate you were hoping to achieve and what you're currently paying, can you just put some numbers there?
Yes, so in the 24-25 capital strategy, which was approved this time last year, sort of February last year, wasn't it, by Council? Yeah. They were expecting PWP borrowing to be in December 2024 to be at around 4.2%. We assumed sort of 4.5% to give us a little bit of prudence. And currently 12-month is 5.5%, 6%, if you can find it at this point in time. PWLB rates are 5.2 to sort of 6%, depending on what time frame you want to take it out at. So we are a percentage and a bit more above there. This is all in the Q3 Treasury Management Report as well. Sets out the tables and where we are with the different rates and how it's been impacted over time. What another issue we have is the under borrowed position that the council has benefited from for the last couple of years. So because it's held a prudent level of reserves and it's held sort of things, sort of funding that is required for the next 12 months, so sort of SPF, isn't it? That funding is being drawn down this year. So we've had the benefit of not having to take borrowing out to that level. But of course now that's saved us, you know, we've been 100 million under borrowed, so that saved us 100 million or whatever the interest rate you want to work it out at per year. As we move from that position, because that's not sustainable with the pressures we have on the revenue budget and the grant drawdown, we're going to have to pick that up as an interest cost. or we find some other ways to fund it. But at the moment, there is no other way. So it you know, what we've had as a benefit over the last few years, we're not been able to have that benefit now.
So thank you, James. Just to help the group, what is the total expected borrowing, additional borrowing we are forecasting in the next financial year 25-26? Right, ballpark.
I think it's 10 million. That isn't related to the HRA. That's just the council fund. We've done quite a bit of work in
Sorry, it might have just been me, but I missed that. James, can you repeat, please?
Yeah, off the top of my head, I think it's around 10 million additional borrowing to fund the capital programme. We may need more borrowing as the under borrow position changes, but the capital programme has been reviewed and has been tightened down as much as possible for the next 12 months to ensure that we're maximising grants and other funding to ensure that our borrowing is not as high as it.
Yeah, so 1% on that is quite substantial sum of money, really. So thank you, James. Any other questions on the
Can I come back?
Yeah, John, do you want to come back, please?
Please, if I may. Two things. First of all, on capital receipts, Jane, you mentioned we should maximise that. I had heard talk about £10 million a year, but in these papers here, it's 6 million dropping to 4 million, dropping to 2 million. Can you reconcile the two statements for me? That's the first thing. And the second thing is, could I ask you, as a Section 151 officer, do you think our capital programme is sustainable in its present form? Are we going to have to look very seriously at the scope of the 21st Century Schools programme, or whatever it's called now?
Jane, can you pick up those two?
Yeah. So let me touch on capital receipts. So we've set within the capital strategy a target to deliver 10 million per annum. As to when we pull those into the capital programme, that is slightly different. So that's why you see different figures. So we are planning to use the figures that you quoted, John, over the next couple of years. But we do reflect on that on an annual basis. So we look to see if we have grant funding in, we would use that first. So it may not always be the level that we build in initially. We leave that flexibility and look for the most effective application of capital receipts to give us the greatest benefit. And an example of that is some of the shorter term projects attract higher interest rates in terms of the number of years. So we may look to use capital receipts for that, as opposed to the longer term borrowing, which we may be able to get at shorter, at lower levels. That being said, the capital receipts and the 10 million target is to create the sustainable capital programme going forward. So I think this is where your question about affordability to myself as the 151 officer is. We are looking at all of those things that can help us maintain that sustainability. If our capital programme, if costs continue to escalate, if interest rates continue at their current levels, we will have to reflect on all of that. And that could result on us having to push projects further into the future than we would like, because they're simply not affordable in the next few years. So it's all part of that balance as to what we do with capital. So yeah, we're just being really mindful and keeping a very keen eye on it before we commit to those new and further projects.
Thank you, Jane. I'm thinking in terms of the scope of work that we look at for the schooling, whether we're looking at refurbishment rather than replacement in certain instances, and what our attitudes are there. But so I agree with you. We've got to keep a very careful eye on it, because otherwise this could run out of control. Aled, I've got another question, but it's about pensions. Do you want me to deal with that now or later?
Can I just push back on this capital programme? And you did touch on it there in your final comment. There's a balance from a service user. If your child's in the school and you're buying more buckets to catch more drips, it's not a great look, and it's may impact on the quality of, not necessarily in schools, but it's across the council. But cutting back on the capital expenditure may impact on the service delivered to our residents, and when you look at 2050, net zero 2050 or 2035 or 2030, whichever regime you want to apply the council to, there's a significant impact there too of investing in the future. Trying to retrofit stuff is even more expensive sometimes. So there's a sweet spot to be hit there somewhere, isn't there? Now, who's going to decide where that sweet spot is?
All I'd say is, as far as service delivery is concerned, it's going to be absolutely dependent in the future on the way that we manage our capital programme. Because if anything's going to impact our revenue budget, it's going to be excessive borrowing. And that in turn is going to mean that we're going to be limited in the type of services we actually deliver to our residents. So, what Jane is saying about monitoring and managing the capital programme, because there's all these other economic KPIs, these external factors that are going to impact it, and they've got to be managed going forward. Otherwise, your revenue budget becomes unmanageable.
Yes, but your revenue budget will be picking up the maintenance costs, won't it?
Yeah.
It's also for maintenance issue on a school. Do you put teachers in front of the classroom, or do you mend the leaking roof in simple terms? So it's a mix, isn't it?
But it's a mix, but it's got to be affordable as well. That's the point I'm trying to make. And the school's dedicated budget would have a certain level of funding within that to address everyday sort of issue. So it's a small leak in a ceiling where you've got a bucket underneath it. Hopefully that could be addressed through that budget. But for major programs, obviously there's a separate capital program, isn't there, for school improvement? But it is absolutely essential going forward that we manage this capital budget very, very carefully.
Yeah, of course it is. But it's the council is there to deliver services at the end of the day, isn't it? At an affordable price. Thank you. Jeremy, did you want to follow up on this?
Yeah, I think for knowledge for councillors coming up to full council now regarding the budget, I think we should have a small appraisal on the performance of the budget from last year. In fact, in real good terms, we should have for the last 3 years, so we understand how we've performed, where we've been weak, and where things externally have affected us and how they've affected us, because I don't believe a lot of people really understand 1% is massive with the debt that we're carrying, and people don't understand that. And I think to have better knowledge, it gets a better outcome. So I'd love to see an appraisal of the last 3 years' budget, small document, service by service, and explain a little bit, notes explaining how certain things outside our control have affected the budget. And I honestly think that for people, because there's no point in people just sitting here and following someone, like follow the leader and voting for stuff they don't understand, because that just ends. Ignorance isn't an excuse. And I just think I'd like people to really know what they're voting on.
Yeah, can I just add to that before you come in? There was the financial resilience report from Audit Wales, came to governance audit not so long ago, but in that there's a very important line around the impact on the resident, how these changes to services impacts on the residents, and that's part of what Jeremy is saying. What has the impact been on the residents of these changes in service delivery? And to date, there haven't been huge differences in service delivery. You'd hope there'd be acceleration. So learning from what has happened in the past, is it really important? Before you come in, do you want to have a quick little dab on this?
I think what Councillor Jeremy's saying is a great idea, but I think we should go back ever so slightly further into the previous council, so we've got a bit more to compare to see, one to the other. So we've got a bit more information.
More knowledge you've got, the better.
Exactly. Thank you.
Yeah. Jane or David, who would you like to?
Well, with regard to the financial sustainability and the measuring that regarding monitoring the impact on residents, in many ways, all that will need is an extension of the impact assessment process. So you revisit, if you've identified a measure that's going to have an impact on residents, then what they're saying basically is you've identified it, you've mitigated it best you can, but you need to revisit it to fully understand if that mitigation was appropriate or if there was further impact. So that's the way I read that particular measure. I don't, they might have a different view on that.
But we don't.
No, we don't know at the moment. It's something we've
No,
got to get
but
better
you know,
at.
impact assessments are live documents, aren't they? They're supposed to be live from the initial idea as it develops, implemented, and then the impact at the end of the day after being in situ for a couple of years. Sorry, Jane.
Yeah, I think if I start with that one, that was one of the recommendations within the Audit Wales Financial Resilience. We might be good at setting out at the start what that impact might be, but we don't then reflect on that and see what the actual was. So I think, yeah, we've taken that on board and looking to develop that more widely. In terms of the précis of the position over the last few years, there are some key documents that are already out there. Appreciate they can be quite lengthy and it's very difficult to pull a £350 million budget across such a diverse range of services into a very small précis of the position. But what I can do very much so is try and give you the exact summaries of those key documents. You know, I think the outturn report for each of the last few years is a key document. We've also done then a financial planning report in the summer of each year that has challenges are, what those external factors are and how they impact on our budget and then influence our budget plans. So I think we can give you that and I'll look to do that now as quickly as we can.
I think what we're looking for is that success, fail, and stuff which is outside hours, like the inflation. I think that is basically what we're looking for, is to see the performance. And I'm more than happy to go back. The more years you go back, the more knowledge you've got, the better. But I'm not saying I want. Yeah, each document can be small and appropriate to each year. You don't need to, it doesn't have to be huge. But this is what our prediction. This is what we've done. This was success. This has failed. Mitigating circumstances. And sometimes we've had a success, but we've had a success because a grant has come in. And it might have been a failure, and I think identifying that, it's not about which hunts, it's about knowledge going forward. And I think the public need to see that document, because I think that they don't really understand the difference of 1% to 0.5% to 0.25% on the debt we're carrying. So, and knowledge is only good, and people help with their understanding. When you're going to be asking for 8.5, I think they need to have some understanding of why. So could we have we're going to have that document then? Do I take it?
Well,
leave it with me. I might even share something I'm considering. Sorry, because I leave it with me. I may even share what I'm considering to do with you, so that you can see whether it fits the bill.
Thank you.
Gareth, did you want to add on that? Because you've been talking to me about lessons learned from the past, or is that capturing what you want, or do you want to expand on that slightly?
Yeah, I'll expand on it. I was taking an oversimplistic view, thinking that the criteria on how you're going to reduce the gap in next financial year was the same classification as in previous years. But I looked back and it isn't. So being optimistic, I thought, could we have consistency going forward? Which you said would be something that would come out of the longer term sustainable development process. But that, looking backwards, Councillor Jeremy encapsulated that, so I would be very much looking for that as well. The great thing would then be, could we compare, could we learn the lessons from the past and apply them to the future? Always. That would be the acid test.
Yeah. And I know it's not always goalposts moved, aren't there? And politicians are fantastic at moving goalposts for the officers sometimes. So I'm not blaming officers. It's a political element that can get in the way sometimes. So yeah. So no, thank you both on that. Did you know or are you happy with the? Yeah. So you could share your initial thoughts with the committee of governance and audit, or whichever, or both. That would be really helpful. Thank you, Jane. Any other hands up, or we shall move on to pensions. So I'll drag John Brodingham back in. John. John Scott has a hand up, but are you muted, John?
I'm muting. Sorry, I've made it, I think. Can you hear me?
Yes, brilliant. Thank you.
Yeah. I spotted something on page 58, I think it is. And it's about pension costs. And it said it was talking about the review in last one we had in 2023, the actuarial review, that is. The next review will take place in 2025, and as a fully funded pension scheme, we have assumed further savings could be achieved from 26-27 by removing the back-funded contribution rates of 1.5 million each year. Now, I presume that is the thing that we used to call the past service deficit, which is funded separately to the percentage that we pay on of each person's salary into the scheme, and resulted as a result of the change from full final salary to I think average salary, isn't it, Jane? We at one time that deficit was about 20 odd million, but it's been coming down. I totally agree with what you've done. I was rather surprised you've done it because you've always been rather reluctant to put it in the past. But I was looking back and I was trying to see what the impact of the various criteria that the actuary will be looking at. And one of the largest ones, of course, is the discount rate. Now, discount rate has an enormous impact on the viability of the pension fund, in that it affects very much the present value of the future liabilities that we have. And a 1% change in the discount rate was reported to be affect something like £100 million change in future liabilities. That whet my appetite a bit more, and I tried to look back and see what the discount rate used in 2023 was, and I couldn't find it. I couldn't find the report, but I did find the figures in the National Health figures, and in 2023 they used a figure of 3%. And in 2025, they are recommending a figure of 5.15%. Now, that is 2.15% higher than the figure we used then. We're talking then about many, many tens of millions of potential swing in the value of the fund. I know what goes up can come down just as easily. And I also know that it's going to be mitigated to a certain extent by inflation. But what I'm saying to you, Jane, is are there going to be, with the stubborn way that the interest rates are being stuck now, do you think there is an opportunity going forward to be rather more ambitious rather than just looking at the past deficits, but perhaps looking a bit more hawkishly at what we could do with the percentage element of the contributions?
Thanks, John. So is there an upside to slightly higher interest rates, Jane?
There is indeed.
It's thankfully, this calculation is down to the actuary. Yes, we have discussions with the actuary and we go through the assumptions and various aspects of that, but the actuary has the final say on those factors, which leaves it totally independent of myself, the council, and everybody concerned. You know, it is very much that calculation. So in terms of the budget plan, I won't go into all of the detail around the calculation, John, because I don't think it's probably relevant for here today. But yes, it's a very complicated. There are a number of factors that get built into that actuarial review and that revaluation, and that is taking place in readiness for the 26-27 financial year. The pension fund, I'm pleased to say, has functioned well over the last couple of years. And it is in a much better funding position than it was. You know, you mentioned where it was several years ago, and we've seen that improvement through it. The strategy has fared well, that the Pensions Investment Committee have implemented, and we've we've seen that through the figures. The figures that have been included within the budget plan are very much estimates. I think I've been reluctant to do that in the past. But when we're trying to develop a 5-year plan, we need to make some assumptions around that, particularly as we've seen that funding position improve and be sustained. It gives you a little bit more assurance, and it's not different to what we're seeing across many of the other funds across Wales. So it will be a key consideration in terms of that actuarial review. So that's the basis in which it's included. It's not guaranteed by any means, and it will be reflected on when we know the results of that review, and then we would put it in. What I have done in terms of the plan is implemented over a period of time. That takes away some of the risk and some of those factors that you're highlighting there. So by smoothing that potential transition, you eliminate those peaks and troughs that might happen as things change, as inflation rates impact and so on. So it's one to watch, but we won't have that certainty until the review itself has been completed and the actuary has given their findings.
Will the historically, the actuaries usually report around the autumn of the year, or late autumn of the year, in which they do the study. But last time it was rather longer, wasn't it? We were well towards the end of the financial year before we actually saw the report. If there were opportunities, we need to spot them earlier, don't we, in the budget planning process? That's really what I'm getting to.
We're talking about end of 2026, are we? Like,
yeah. We're talking about the end of this year in planning for 26-27. Yes.
I mean, you do have the conversations that I had with the actuary, prior to it being concluded, starts to give you a little bit of an indication.
Right.
But we have to wait until it's final. Even if it's provisional, we could work on that basis.
Yeah. But what I'm trying to seek to avoid is making very damaging cuts, which may not be necessary once the result is out, if you understand me.
Thank you, John. I'm sure we'll be kept up to date with the progress of that actuarial review. Are they sort of tend to be cautious beasts, or are they?
I think you have to. Prudence is always the word that we use within any financial elements, of course, but you know, their experience and the robustness of those estimates are absolutely critical to everything that you can see here. So we are very much, you know, reliant on them, but they are part of a bigger universe of people, aren't they?
Yeah.
That debate those things.
Yeah, but it does affect budgets really substantially.
It does.
This council has benefited from reductions. The previous council got hammered with increases.
There were increases.
So, you know, I think it was about £6 million, wasn't it? But, you know, it can have significant impact. So the early sights on, or heads up on that sort of direction of travel, it is so important.
Yeah.
So thank you, Jane. Any other follow-up questions on pensions after John's? Or are we fairly happy with that? Thank you. I know we haven't had a lot of structure to this meeting, and apologies for that, but I did, you know, a lot of this budget is driven by assumptions and the level of funding from Welsh Government and the economic outlook as well. We talked about this council tax being did you say, you know, lots of increases across Wales? Have you done a bit of work to understand where other Welsh councils are? Are we in the middle, or are we at the high end, or are we at the low? Do you know what the typical average council tax will be in?
I haven't seen them all, but those I have seen, we were sitting sort of midway.
Yes,
midway. I think generally the more rural the authorities are, the higher the level council tax has been set.
Because we do see from the medium-term financial strategy within the report, the low level of funding Powys receives compared to other local authorities. We're sort of over 30% self-funded, where others are sort of down at 20% self-funded
Yeah.
makes a huge difference, doesn't it?
Yeah,
And I know we mentioned in a previous meeting that the team Jane and her team has provided you with a bit of what's coming to running a consultation type on the settlement and the impacts. Jane has provided a lot of background information for that. Is it possible for you to share that letter, that consultation document you responded to Welsh Government with?
We're going to share it with group leaders.
We'll share it with the group leaders.
Yeah,
or...
we've already taken that decision, but
okay.
it's a confidential.
It's still confidential at the moment, is it?
Yeah.
Okay. Will they be published in general across? Do you get? I was just wondering whether you get to see other local authorities bids as well. But
I'm not sure.
okay, but it'd be good to see that. Would it be okay to share it with this finance panel on a confidential basis?
Yeah, as long as we maintain the confidentiality around it, obviously. But I think, you know, possibly once we've got the budget out of the way, etc., I think we could share it with a wider distribution then within the authority. But as it stands currently, I think it might be wise to keep it confidential. But,
okay.
I wouldn't want to do anything that might be detrimental to something coming forward in the future.
Yeah, because there was another area I wanted to touch on, you know, press speculation about funding flow. It's always a bit of a difficult topic with other local authorities. Is there any further news on that at all?
No, not at the moment. You know, obviously the WLGA made representations as well. There was some early indication that the Cabinet Secretary might have been listening to the concerns, but we haven't had anything concrete or definite as to whether there is going to be a flow. The one thing I would say, as I've maintained all along, I think there is going to be one. To be realistic, I'd say, you know, we'd be lucky if it was set at about 4%. I can't see a bit much higher than that. So any benefit to Powys would be limited, because if it was 4%, for argument's sake,
what is that worth, roughly? What is 1% now?
Yeah.
What is 1%?
I'm quoting, I think it's about 2.3
million.
Yeah.
1%.
Yeah.
But I think it's important to emphasise that we've had no indication whatsoever that there is going to be a flow.
No.
So we've got to work with what we've got at the moment.
And it's a strange source system. You know, Welsh Government haven't had their budget approved yet, and we.
Yeah.
No.
And you know, coming back to the settlement again, you know, what penalises Powys is the funding formula doesn't work. It doesn't favour Powys. It doesn't favour rural authorities because there's very, very limited identity with regard to rural cost analysis, etc., in the formula at the moment. So that's something that hopefully, you know, WLGA and Welsh Government can address in the future. And we made those points in the letter that we've sent to Welsh Government.
Yeah.
But the two indicators that worked against us for this settlement were population numbers and secondary school pupil numbers.
Yeah. And Jane, I remember in some forum you said there was before any change in settlement, there was a negative impact.
There was.
What's some of that negative impact?
Yeah, I'd have to go back and have a look at the specifics, but as you're aware, the formula gets adjusted, reviewed, changes are implemented in it. We also get transfers coming through in the settlement. So how those are distributed can have a significant impact on individual settlements. So we've seen some of those coming through. Two of the biggest factors that impact on the settlement are where councils are spending their money. So every year we all submit a return in exactly the same way, and that helps inform, I call them the buckets of the formula. So what goes into education, what goes into social services, what goes into the other buckets, if you like. That's dictated by spend. So we've all seen across Wales an increase in spend in terms of social care. So that's one of the biggest shares of that overall pot. So when Powys gets a lower proportion of that compared to others, it can have a detrimental impact on the way the formula works and how it allocates that funding. And that's what's happened to us in this last year, where we've seen the change in the amounts into each of those categories, then how that's allocated. We saw over £1 million worth of reduction in terms of our settlement. So it's the circular nature of the settlement itself, unfortunately. in terms of that. So we saw a negative impact there. We also then saw some of the transfers coming through that didn't give us a benefit, so to speak, either. So all of that has impacted on the overall position. I think without those, we would have been nearer the average across Wales.
Okay, I'm interested in, you know, representations have been made in the past. I'm sure you'll be continuing to make those representations, that the funding formula doesn't truly represent the cost of running a rural authority. Interesting, you touched on education secondary school numbers. Does that include post-16?
No, post-16 funding is given via a specific grant application, so it's outside of that in the settlement.
Because, and this relates back to sustainable powers and school transformation, etc., etc., etc. There has been, in some areas of the authority, greater flow of post-16 and pre-16 as well, over the border to education facilities in England. Is that having a detrimental? Can you quantify the impact of that on the settlement?
I know on a per pupil basis, the settlement, we get roughly just over 4 million, I think, per pupil.
That's a standard spending assessment, isn't it? Type.
Yes.
But there would also be grants and stuff linked to that as well.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, pupil numbers and the numbers that we hold do form a lot of the formula allocations that come from Welsh Government, be it the settlement or specific grants.
Is it a big job of work to understand the impact of cross-border movements on our overall settlement?
I'd have to look at it and see how difficult it is.
But it'd be interesting to see, especially when you talk about sustainable powers, looking at the schools' footprint across powers and the impact of decisions in certain areas, especially on border schools. And the consequences for the overall settlement and the impact on the education of the children as well. So I'd like some sort of recommendation around that, but I'm very loath to give you additional work, Jane, at the same time. But
I'd have to look at that before I can commit to that.
Okay, Jeremy.
I got to be honest, you've opened my eyes. I never realised that the children in high schools affect the settlement. You know, to me, I've always said post-16 education is our biggest challenge and should be our number one thing, because what we're doing is losing our way of life with people moving out, and we just aren't grasping that nettle. We're still no further on than what we were 6 or 7 years. In fact, I think we've gone backwards in quite a few cases. You know, from Dilth, they're getting on the bus at 6:10 in the morning, going to Hereford, getting back 7 o'clock at night. Now, if they can afford to send a bus here back and forth, and we now know, which I never realised before, that as part of the settlement, I got to be honest, this is shocking to me. I got to be honest, this is absolutely stupidity. You know, that I would be looking after them youngsters, and I tell you what, our post-16 education needs to start to offer for youngsters to actually do degree courses with support from a post-16 education. And I mean, we need to start looking outside the norm. I feel we're stuck in this little narrative of what we want to do and not what really going to make a difference. And post-16, not building schools, not building anything, not any other development, but looking after them youngsters, giving them the best education, giving them the chance to stay local without moving away and to be poached and to stay. If they want to go, they still have the right to go. I fully back whatever they want to do. But a lot of people are ending up with massive amount of debt. Well, we could actually support that and have a far better settlement. So it'd really be paying for itself. I just don't understand the sense behind why we haven't done it. It shocked me. I don't know where I can say I'm absolutely shocked with that.
So that's why it's important to understand the impact, the financial impact. Choice is important for the pupils, and education is a numbers game as well. You know, you've got to have big numbers to offer that range of opportunities, and the Welsh Government's third action now is to increase those range of opportunities, which will be even more challenging. But you know, that's what sustainable powers is about, isn't it? And the moment we're talking about capital costs, and now we're talking about service delivery. And you know,
We're
it's
talking,
a
we're
challenge.
talking of getting rid of buildings that are surplus. With the surplus, one in the north, one in the south, post-16 education or attached to a high school with a surplus, because we seem to have surplus, like Breccon's got 30%, you know, empty. You know, we should be grasping this nettle and moving forward, because I don't see there's any progress in it since I've been on the council. And when I find out this now, so we've got buildings, let's grasp the nettle. And let's be honest with you, you can hire people now. You don't have to actually employ the person, you employ the service where they actually come over the internet and do it. And if you look at the Hebrides, the very successful model there. Like I said to you before, my friend did it, what you call it on that. And there's plenty to learn from. So we don't need to actually employ people within Powys to deliver that service. It can be delivered via the internet. And I think I'm disappointed to find this out today.
Thank you, Jeremy. I been told by Kath that's a disadvantage of Zoom. You can't see who's entering quietly at the back of the room. But she just pointed out that Marianne has entered the room quietly. But Marianne, I don't want to get too deeply into the discussion. It needs to be for learning and skills scrutiny, but it'd be good just to have a high level your thoughts on this. I'm sorry, I'm throwing you in the deep end.
No, it's fine. On post-16, I take it, Aled. Yeah, sorry, I was in another meeting, so I've just come back in.
Yes, it is flaws about cross-border flows and the impact on the overall budget of Powys.
Oh, yeah. So in terms of post-16, we are looking at this at the moment. Strategic review is currently being carried out. We've come to a point where we've been able to evaluate the current system. So the current model for post-16 is we have 12 sixth forms and the schools collaborate. And that was a model approved by Cabinet in 2021. And whilst the model, has improved collaboration, coordination, planning, etc. of the post-16 curriculum and working closely with other partners as well, we've come to a position where financial settlements for next year are showing a very sort of difficult position for us as a council. We're not able then to look at how do we improve the curriculum offer, but we are now looking at options around it. So we will be bringing papers back to Cabinet later on this spring around post-16. I've frozen, haven't I? Yeah.
Okay, Marianne.
Okay.
Your connection isn't great, but just watch your space. Is what you're saying? There'll be some difficult decisions coming forward.
It's time it's time to really take some ambitious, courageous steps here with post-16. And I've been around this agenda for a long time, and I think we haven't taken decisions when we maybe should have taken them. But actually, we're now in a position we can't cut any further. It's a death by 1,000 cuts in our schools and in our sixth forms. But it's an opportunity. Please see it as an opportunity to really do something really radical and ambitious for the learners of Powys. We need to link with the economy. We need to link with businesses. There's so much potential around post-16. I think it's a really exciting period.
Okay, you heard my comments of learning and skills, and if you were here earlier, Jane and David said capital was no object. That's Marianne. And Gareth.
Yeah, I'd just like to pick up on the final point that Marianne said there about post-16 education, increasing the supply side in terms of educational attainment and skills. But there's also a demand side as well, in that there needs to be a corresponding policy about support for business and availability of modern premises for them to employ these people. And hopefully with the hub concept in Sustainable Powys, those factors will be brought together.
Gareth, thank you. Any other comments on this area now before we move on? No? Marianne. I was just going through my little crib sheet. We talked about asset disposal as a disposal here around the capital programme. And we do need to look at the risk and elements within this budget, and also important part of that in mitigating the risk is the reserves and the reserves table. You have first person to find the page. It's about page 12, was it from memory? No. And it's something the finance panel asked last time. It is about that reserves position at the end of the next financial year. This one now is the reserves table here is for this financial year. So the plea was last time was to add another column to tell us where the reserves will sit at the end of the next financial year. But it hasn't been done. Is there difficulties in producing that? Because you understand the risks and the flow of an impact on the reserves of this revenue budget this time.
It's, if I were to produce you a table that showed that potential use for 26, it wouldn't stay static.
No, I appreciate that. It'd be a snapshot in time,
It would
wouldn't
be,
it? But
because the reserves that we hold now are being drawn upon.
Yeah.
But come the end of the year, depending on where we are with grants received in advance and so on, the reserve balances will change at that point in the year. I know this was something that I was discussing with the finance team. It's easier to pull it together once you've got the budget on the system, because you can just run reports and so forth. But of course, we haven't completed all of that work yet to get it onto the system. So you did raise it last year, and I know we did promise that we would do it. We should be able to do it probably around the time that the budget papers for council are coming out.
Okay.
So about mid-Feb, I think we should be in a position. So taking that on board and the request, we'll see what we can do and add it to the final papers.
Okay, no, that would be helpful, because incredibly important part of your role here is as section
To assess that as well.
is to assess the risk within the budget. Can you we talked about the risk reserves and other issues, and there's risks that's carried within the budget without any cover. Can you sort of talk us through the levels of the actual numbers within the budget, and also your thoughts on the risk that budget contains?
So the assessment that I've given based on the plan that you see before you is included at the back end of the budget report. You know, there's a number of points there around the robustness of the budget and the level of risk that we hold. So factor in the 4% minimum in terms of the general fund. We have held that level of reserve for many years. And I think we've not changed that significantly, but held it at that 4%. So assessing that together with the risk budget that was built into the budget plan several years ago, where we now hold within our base budget a £3 million revenue budget that offsets some of that risk. And considering as well in terms of where we've been in those previous years, you know, as was picked up earlier, you've got to think about where we have been, how robust we think our plans are in terms of delivery, what we've seen in the past in terms of our delivery of savings. You know, we've seen that percentage increase last year to where we've been in previous years. So you think of all of these things in terms of me being able to undertake that assessment. And again, it is a balance, isn't it? Because if we were to put reserves up or put more into reserves, that impacts on the revenue budget, it impacts on the council tax levels that we impose on our residents and so forth. So all of that is considered, and I think we have an appropriate level of reserves, but as I say in my comment, they are still at that lower level of acceptability. But with the budget monitoring system that we have in place and the effectiveness of that, it gives me some assurance that should things change, we can do something about it by being aware of the situation early. As we've seen this year, you know, when we saw early forecasts, there was a need to review where we were. We put a recruitment freeze in place. We looked at spend controls at a service level to try and bring that back. And we've done that in the past. So all of that is part of my consideration to be able to give council the level of assurance that you're seeking, that the budget proposal before you is robust enough. And I think I'm comfortable that's where we are, but we have to keep that under review.
Okay. I think Audit Wales did praise your budget monitoring, didn't they?
They did.
Can't remember which report it was, but it's so Audit Wales are really comfortable and think that you're doing a good job around the budget monitoring, which is really good news. But can of the revenue budget reserves, risk reserves last time, is there any left
Risk budget.
within this year, just to understand, has it all gone?
It's been fully allocated this year.
Was fully allocated, and what is the forecast? Is it forecast overspend for this year?
We're just doing Q3 now. We brought the projected overspend at Q2. We've seen an improved picture, and that will be set out now at Q3, where you will see the detail behind that and what's made that improvement across each of the individual service levels. So I think we are about at a balanced position for Q3 now, after that action's been taken.
So those risk reserves
Were
put in place this time last year were adequate.
The 3 million, yes, we've allocated. You'll be aware that we did have some additional funding come through this year, and we added that to that risk pot. So we haven't allocated over and above the 3 million. We've still got that 2 million sat there as well, but that's part of the overall picture in terms of that improved position. So although not allocated to specific services, that is now offsetting some of the areas that we still see projecting overspends.
Yeah, without that additional in-year
we would be
funding,
in a
there would
position.
be quite a different picture, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
So in a way, there was an adequate cover last year or not? Are we
not totally?
Are we lucky to have that in your funding, or because it wasn't actually planned, was it? But or expected?
Well, I think we knew there was a level of risk, and we could identify that and itemize it at individual category levels. You know, I think we said at that point we were carrying about £6 or £7 million level of risk against that budget. I think in this budget, it's higher than that. I think it's over 10 million that we've got held at risk this year.
So it's 10 million held at risk.
Yeah, over and above, or against that 3 million budget.
Over and above the 3 million?
No, against that £3 million budget.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the improved picture for 24-25 is partly to do with the fact that we had that risk budget there, that we could use that to offset a lot of the overspend that was developing in Q2. But going forward, I think we've got to accept as an authority that our general fund level is very, very low compared to other local authorities. We really are down the bottom end, and that obviously presents added risk. And I think that's important, and it's important for the public to understand that in itself is a threat. I think we really do need to look at the general fund reserve going forward, and if possible, try to increase that slightly.
No, and thanks to Nina as director of the social services area, which was impacted by huge increases in demand, and which resulted in that overspend within your area. But again, what level of risk is your service holding? Because it's now the biggest service. It's overtaken education. It's now the biggest spending service within the council. What level of risk does your service? You had a 12% increase, is it?
Within the draft budget, there's a 12% uplift
huge.
For adult social care and 5% for children's services. But Chair, there is still a level of risk within the draft budget for social services, because we're holding demography at risk. So for children's services, for example, any new child or children that come into the service from the 1st of April, there isn't the budget there that would be at risk, unless of course we had other children who were moving out of the service or stepping down, etc. So, you know, and the same with adults, we're again holding demography at risk, so new people coming into the service. So yes, there is absolutely there is an element of risk for social services in the budget moving forward, noting also the uplifts and the investment as well.
So in this current year, you did a similar sort of thing this time last year, did you? Or so what sort of additional in both areas, children and adults, what sums are involved in this current financial year of that additional spend because of this additional demand?
Sorry, Chair, I'm not quite sure which figure you're asking
Oh,
for.
in this year, you had additional costs in children's services, which was held at risk this time last year. So what's that sum for children and what's that sum for adults?
Could you give me a couple of minutes to find
Yeah,
those figures
okay.
for you? Apologies, Chair.
Just to understand the level of risk, that's what I'm trying to get. Any other questions on the level of risk held within this budget, Jeremy?
Couple of things. What we're talking about is the big risk with adult services, people moving into the area. I've said this going back when I was up and down there with Roger Williams years ago. We should be approaching national government. If people have worked all their lives, and I'm British and Welsh, not the other way around, and people move into the area, we simply cannot afford. We get the money to support them, but we don't have the infrastructure. So there's no money for the infrastructure, and people are moving in and then become dependent within this area. National government needs to recognise that, and some money that they've paid into the areas where they are, there needs to be a formula for that to follow. And the other one is, I don't see anything on the risk register for the adult services. And I've got people, I rent quite a large number of properties, and I'm seeing people now. I went the other week and this youngster run out of gas. When I got there, he hadn't run out of gas, he got no electric. 6 more days till the end of the month. I've not come across that, where people really are struggling. And I think we're going to start seeing, there's nothing on there that I see about families handing loved ones in, saying, we literally cannot afford to look after our elderly relatives. And it is a huge risk, because if they are turned over to powers, it will bankrupt us. And we don't, for me, it's never shown, and I've raised this several times, there is a risk there. And as things are going to get tighter, and I only see personally inflation rising, not going down personally myself at the moment. And I do see interest rates rising slightly again shortly, which is not, you know, really the nicest thing in the world. But for me, we need to identify this risk, because if we leave these people to the point that they simply cannot anymore care for the elderly and their family, the cost to us is going to be huge, because there are no places. And I think that we should have a risk factor showing that as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane.
Yeah, just pick up. I mean, yes, we've seen that increase in demand, haven't we, over the last couple of years? And in terms of the modelling for the predictions over the next few years, we will have factored that in. So we know what our population looks like for our older people as well. Those that are up to 65, those that are over 65, and those that are over 80. We've got all of that modelling is helping us sort of predict that future demand. Just in terms, I know you mentioned about when people move in that we don't necessarily get the money. We do get the money for those via the settlement, because the settlement again does pick up on our population data, and they look at who's actually living in Powys to inform that formula. So, you know, that funding does come with them to that degree. So just to pick up on that, but we know the demand is rising, and the complexity of demand is rising. So that's creating the pressure for us. But I know Nina's looking for the report that she presented at Q2, which of course has got some of that detail.
We get the money that comes in, but there's no infrastructure to support them. So you can have money to look after someone, but if you've got no infrastructure, it's money that's not, it's worthless, because you've got nothing. So the cost of looking after them is more likely double because you haven't got that infrastructure built in. Whereas if people have come up through into Powys and become elderly, the infrastructure will identify and it will have grown with them, and so will the infrastructure that supports them. When we get people coming in, we get money to support them people, but no infrastructure, and that is a massive cost. And we are getting happily people coming into Powys, but we need to be applying for a bigger settlement for the infrastructure, if you understand my point.
I think it's because it's a problem for all local authorities, you know, what you're talking about around adult social care in particular. And I think it's going to, as you rightly say, it's going to take government intervention to address it properly. That's the reality of the situation. I'm looking forward to a 0.25% decrease in interest rates next month.
Yeah.
That's my forecast, but we will see anyway. I'm just looking at looking at the gilt markets and the way things are moving there, but we'll see.
Oh, we'll put that in the notes, and we'll see you next time. Nina.
Yeah, Chair, thank you for that. In terms of adult social care holding at risk for the current year, that's right, sorry, just make sure I get the right years, 1.647 million, and for children's services 3.7 million. So yeah, and they, as Jane says, all that information is in the report I brought to full council in the autumn. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not as quick as you finding those. Just to give some degree of scale. What you haven't mentioned in risk is also the size of the school deficits, especially in high school. Not the net position, the total deficit, because that is quite a substantial figure, isn't it? Yes. What level is that? I know Councillor Pete was quite adamant that, and it's clear from table 5 up to table 6, that the pressures are funded this year, but the last 2 years, all the pressures were not funded, and it has had a big impact on the reserves level or deficit level within some schools. I don't think, or perhaps I'm wrong, the funding settlement for future years will not allow the schools to strengthen their balance sheet, will they? They'll just hopefully allow them to live within costs for the 12 months, I'm guessing. But while Jane looks for that number, perhaps you can.
Yeah, I think the forecast going forward, I think initially based on the projections that schools themselves are feeding in to the education service, we could have been looking in 5 years' time at that deficit position of about £15 million. But I think with this extra funding going in to allow them to actually fund the formula correctly or as close to as they can, and with the work that's going to continue in schools with regard to deep dives and any measures they might need to take to make adjustments, etc., I think it's forecast to drop to about £5 million, but there's still significant work to be done. But that's a big drop from forecast of 15 million down to 5 million
in 5 years' time.
Yeah,
because this year's deficit funding only covers the additional costs, doesn't it?
That the figure of 50 million, that's based on what schools were actually projecting in their budget forecast.
Okay.
Initially.
Okay. Do you have that number, Jane? For is it around 6 million-ish?
For the deficits.
Yeah.
I think I've got some figures here, and I'd need to double check.
Because the reserves table shows a net position, doesn't it?
It does.
And ultimately, these debts, you know, if push comes to shove, falls back on the Council General Reserve, doesn't it?
I don't know. I'm not sure. I don't think Nancy's here, is she? Because she'd have them at her fingertips. I know I've got a summary of the school balances projected for 25. But I'm not sure if these are the absolute latest ones, because obviously schools are working on their plans all of the time.
Well, 31st of March 25.
Yes. And again, I'm just going to see if these correlate to the table that you've got or not. But we were at a point forecasting that surpluses were going to be around 4.5 million across all schools. Where deficits at one point were predicted to be about 6.8, so that was moving us into an overall deficit position.
Yeah, no, sounds about.
at one point, but I think it's been updated since then, but I'll keep having a look and see if I can find the latest figures.
Please, and if you can't find them this afternoon. pass
I
them
can
on to
send
you.
them
Is that
across.
25?
Yeah, because if you
I've
look,
got 3 million in the back of my mind, but and that sort of equates to that.
yeah, and I think it is better than that, because if you look at the table that you've got in the budget report.
Yes, it's true.
For March, that's showing a collective deficit position of just under 1.5 million.
Okay.
So that will be made up, you know, proportionately of some surpluses and some deficits, but we can get those figures to you.
Okay. Yeah, 1.4, yeah, 1.491. isn't it? Okay. Thank you. Yes, yeah, transfers to reserves or use of is 2.3.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, no, thank you very much, Jane. So those figures we highlighted between the two areas, they amount more than £10 million in a way, don't they? Yeah. But and so your overall assessment of the budget compared to last year's budget, do you think it's more risky this time?
I think it's more risky. I think in terms of where we are economically as well, there's a higher level of risk there, isn't there? You know, when we were seeing very stable inflation rates and so forth, we had a better feeling of where it would be. I think because of the national insurance, because of pay awards being more than we projected in the past, all of those factors, I think make it a more risky budget.
And the climate has changed since the budget in the autumn as well, hasn't it? The funding allocations in year 3, 4, 5 of the government were pretty tight before the last budget, but they probably got even tighter this time around. And whether the Chancellor will try and scale back on public expenditure in March, April is the spending assessment, isn't it? It'll be interesting to see what challenges they have for local governments. So, thank you, Jane. Any other comments at all from members? Have we covered most of the areas we wish to discuss? Sorry, I've been doing too much talking and I haven't been looking at my notes. I did highlight some areas or recommendations from other scrutiny committee meetings, which potentially have impacts on the budget. I've been looking for them, I can't find them. Have we covered those areas? Sorry. Yes. No, that's a little pet favorite of mine, tarmac, but I don't particularly want to go down into how much tarmac we'll be using next year. But that's another area of risk, is around road maintenance, because the HDR budget isn't improving at all. That does remind me, there was a concerns in the Economies and Residents Scrutiny Committee around the bus. Additional money from Welsh Government in the bus. There's 3.8 million in and out in the same year, and nothing in the future years. That's a bit concerning, isn't it? What's the impact of 1 year grant funding of 3.8 million when there's no sort of certainty about future year spending? Oh, it's Matt within the. Good afternoon, Matt.
Yeah, afternoon, Councillor Aled. Yeah, so at the moment we are working with Welsh Government in terms of bringing that grant down. So we have got the regional transport plan, and we are confident that grant is coming through through Transport for Wales in conjunction with Ceredigion, that we can roll out those core services. But we've nailed it out at the moment until we are absolutely certain. So we're out to consultation with the public to find out what the appetite is like to in terms of increasing that bus provision across Powys. But ultimately, we are reliant on that grant. So I take your point, in terms of how long it'll be sustained. But we are due to have that information quite imminently.
Okay, and to date, Transport for Wales or Welsh Government haven't given any indication of the longevity. Is it 5+ years or, because when you're investing in new rolling stock buses, you need that longer term view.
Yeah, so we're expecting something literally in the next few weeks in terms of the longevity of it. Myself and John are confident that it will be over a period of years, given the fact that we've got the regional transport plan. Powys and Ceredigion have been used as a pilot now in terms of bus provision. So we are confident, but I get where you're coming from in terms of we need to see it written down off Welsh Government. But we are expecting that quite shortly.
Okay, thanks, Matt. And just one quick aside, really. When at a council level, we were talking about net zero 2030. I'm not sure which year it's in now, and whether it's achievable by 2030 or beyond. The portfolio holder made comment that all new vehicle purchases, etc., would not be internal combustion engines by 2030. And I do see the transport and equipment reserve it's down to £7 million at the end of this financial year, and that's the trouble with this table. It's hard to work out what it will be at the end of the next financial year. But with the cost of new fleets, battery operated or however they are operated, is significant. Are there any plans to replenish the transport and equipment fund?
Yeah, so we are planning to reinvest into that, as you're aware. We've sort of taken some of that out to sort of give us some breathing space in terms of the revenue budget in the past. But what I would say is, as it stands now, to transfer over to electric in terms of our fleet, the costs are virtually 100% to what they were if it was a combustion vehicle. So we are reliant on grant funding. So in the waste and recycling sort of world, we do expect to get funding from Welsh Government on it. But our biggest issue really now is making sure the depots have got the infrastructure in place so that as we do transition to electric fleet, that we've been able to sort of charge, because at the moment it's not there. So we are working through, we have received some funding in excess of 600k to start looking at our waste depots, so Abermule, Ryder and Brecon. But ultimately, that's the direction we need to go. But we would be reliant again on grant funding as it stands, based on that reserve. The investment, the capital replacement for fleet. There's not enough in there to do, because I think we did a study. If we was to transition everything as it is now to electric, it would cost £20 million.
Yeah, and any transition, it will be very dependent on government grants or government initiatives to drive that change on. I got a couple of people waiting. John first, and then Jeremy. John, you're on mute.
Yeah, sorry, I was on mute. I was just concerned listening to the discussion about the buses. Isn't the enhanced bus service absolutely central to sustainable Powys?
It is absolutely, but we are reliant on funding to help that bridge that gap. We would, if I'm confident, I don't want to say that we definitely haven't it, but I am absolutely confident that we are getting the grant funding. But if in the event that we didn't get it, obviously we'd have to look how we would fund that internally, which obviously would be additional pressure. But the signs are that we are going to get the funding to increase that bus provision across Powys.
Okay, it's another risk.
That probably doesn't need an answer. Yeah, I think probably all agree with you there, John. Jeremy.
If we got the 12 million funding, there isn't any electric capacity within Mid Wales to do it. Why are we wasting money on something which cannot be done? My friend owns a garage not 5 miles from here. Turned around, wanted to put 4 super fast chargers in. Couldn't do it. Then put 4 overnight chargers in. Come back off the national grid, couldn't do it, no capacity. Yet we're going through this farce and wasting money on it, spending when it's totally unachievable. Until the lines coming in, bringing electricity in, not exporting out, and there is a difference. It's sorted, we're spending money and we say we're short of money. Come on, let's get in the real world here. This is infuriating, to say the least. I've given the cabinet the paperwork. They know it, it's there, it's in black and white from the national grid. And we're still hearing about electric vehicles. I understand that we've already got an electric ash cart, which Mr. Brin purchased. And I don't believe it's moved more than 5 miles in the last 12 months. It's stuck in the side. In fact, I know councillors actually asked now for a feedback on how much it's actually done. And it's just useless. You speak to the people who've driven it. It can't work. How are you going to turn around and get people now that are living in, say, in a normal street? How are they going to charge vehicles at night? What are they going to do? Run a cable across the pavement? Then who's sued? Who's responsible? Right? So then you're going to pay them to come in the morning to charge the vehicle up so they can go to work. How much is that going to increase our costs? There's no thought to what's going on here. This is an absolute nonsense. I've got to be honest with you. I can't understand. Until the grid is upgraded, it is impossible for Powys to move forward. This is what we need to do. We're spending money in the wrong ways, and this is an absolute waste of money. We need to grasp the nettle, boys and girls, because this is stupidity beyond. Sorry to say it.
And we would probably straying into the realms of the ERCG committee, but it is a real concern. There's little point to us being trailblazers. It'd be far better for us to adopt technology when it's available rather than trying to be ahead of the game in certain areas.
Could we ask as a finance panel what this has cost to go through to look at this electricity fleet? Because that I'd like to know what the costing of that is. Because this to me is a complete waste of money, like throwing it down the drain. Could we have that back?
There's a commitment in the spending is to invest in offices, 2 offices. I can't remember what the title. There's electric, one with electric in the title. I can't remember what the.
And sorry, Chair, and sustainable travel officers for their fixed term posts. Yeah.
Sorry, Matt. What were those posts? Spend this year and double the spend next year, wasn't there?
Yes, one is both within active travel. The electric element is basically looking at, as Councillor Jeremy just pointed out then, let's be frank, at the moment it's not feasible, for people to charge in a terrace street then their car, through cable. So it's looking at all those different aspects. But as it stands now, as vehicles are due for replacement, we are continuing with combustible vehicles. So it's almost like a parallel type element. So we are continuing with the combustible, but we know that more and more of this electrification is coming forward. So we need to get our infrastructure in place. Councillor Jeremy does raise a good point. We've had issues within our car parks where we put chargers in, and it did take us a while to get the grid to connect and back up. So it's all these dynamics that we have to sort of face, but ultimately we got to deliver the services. So as I said, there's 2 things running in parallel. We are getting our infrastructure up to a standard, but equally, we've got vehicles that we need to replace now, and they are being replaced with diesel or petrol.
Okay, do you want to comment on the?
There is one thing simple. There is no capacity in the Mid Wales grid for electric vehicles, chargers, right? There is no capacity. So why are we employing people and spending money and even talking about it here today? To me, is a nonsense in itself. We all want to have electric vehicles. We all want to make a difference. But what is unachievable is unachievable. And this isn't down to the gift of Powys. This is down to National Grid. So until it is done, or the windmills are granted with their export and import license, then it will be there. But until that date, and that date is at least 10 years away, it's not going to be feasible. So it needs to be put on the back burner. Stop wasting paying officers to look at something which is totally unachievable. I know we'd all want it, but it can't happen. And this is a cost which, and with times when we're saving short of money.
Thank you, Jeremy. So,
Thank
Danny.
you, Chair. It's not just that as well. It's the communications network needs to be up to scratch for it, and there's very rarely an online meeting that at least one of us don't drop out because of a poor connection, and a good connection is needed for the EV chargers. But there's also the extra cost of the maintenance facilities for such vehicles. You've got to have massive cordon zones around because of flashpoints of batteries. You know, it just doesn't. It's not the purchase of the vehicle alone. It's
Huge
not
capital investment.
adding the electric chargers. The list goes on and on and on.
I know. Oh, sorry. No, thank you much for attending the meeting. I thought you were just about to answer the questions of the net zero. Thank you, Nina. Thank you much indeed. I do wish to draw the meeting to a close. We've been at it for 2.5 hours. Apologies, everybody. Just want to draw out some recommendations. I don't want to dive down too deep into individual services. I don't want a recommendation about banging the net zero on its head, but we can put a recommendation in around looking at the cost of current cost of delivery now, or re-evaluating the cost of delivering net zero. Karina?
Just going to say, hasn't that cost been removed from the budget? Essentially, economic development is going to look for grants.
With those posts grant funded, just by the way?
Yeah.
I think, you know, I've always made the point that we're having these targets set, you know, and we're being challenged to deliver net zero by 2030 or whatever. I can see that changing, but we wait and see. But I've always made the point that with our current funding levels, both in revenue and capital, we're not going to be able to achieve those targets. Absolutely impossible. So it's all down to Welsh Government and national government to ensure that that funding comes into local authorities. And yes, Councillor Jeremy is quite right. They've got to address the infrastructure problems, the supply problems, etc. And that's a huge task, and it's a huge amount of money required. And we won't do it without central government, Welsh Government support. Simple as that.
So should the recommendation be we follow rather than lead?
If you're having a look at something when you can't do it physically, we simple line in the ground sand until there are definite definitive dates when the network is going to be upgraded. At that point, then we could bring in net zero and look at electric vehicles. But at this moment in time, there's no point in looking at it. One, technology is moving on in strides. Two, it's unachievable. So we got a simple line in the sand. When government come out and put a line in saying, this is the date we're going to be upgrading, then we can put it back on the table. But we're paying people to look at something which is impossible to deliver.
I think the dilemma is, though, isn't it, that we're already receiving grants for specific projects that tie into net zero, and we've got to use those grants for that purpose. So there's something missing somewhere, isn't there? That it's disorganized, it's disjointed.
I say that it's all public money.
Yeah.
And to use public money for something just to buy it because we've given a grant, I gotta be honest, is disrespectful to the public.
And you know, it's having an impact on the capital budget as well as a potential impact as well. So when you're building new schools, we got to be clear around the business case. You know, if it stacks up on the business case, go ahead with it. But you know, if it doesn't, well, we really do need to consider not applying the higher standards. Thank you. I know I got a couple of hands up. Diane. Oh, Diane. I thought, well, let's have Gareth first, and then on this particular topic of we can
thank you, Chair.
Words.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm going to be very quick. Basically, to carry on from the conversation around net zero and the issues with it, we've got to be careful as well that we don't chase figures for the sake of taking figures because the money's there and end up whitewashing and not actually delivering. Sometimes you've got to slow down to speed up. And I think we do need a conversation as a council around net zero and actually with our farming estate and everything else, that we don't get into a position where actually we're chasing figures and making bad decisions. So just supporting Jeremy. I know the issues we have around energy and charging vehicles in Hay and other areas, but I think we've got to look at the wider picture of it all in together.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you, Gareth. Diane, you had your hand up before. Did you want to
I
one
was just
final word on this?
really going to say, just take on board all of Councillor's comments and thank you for those. I think Councillor David did actually pick up on some of the points I was going to raise, but there is a fine balance, isn't there, between what we can actually achieve, being cautious, but still trying to move forward with net zero is still quite clearly in the corporate plan of trying to meet that net zero challenge and trying to address the climate emergency, which isn't going away, unfortunately, however slow we might need to go because of finances. So the fine balance between trying to move forward at a pace that actually kind of works with the funding we have available, but also tries to obtain funding from other sources as best we can, that doesn't put that burden on the financial resilience of the authority going forward, is trying to make those steps forward. And whilst I recognise that there are infrastructure issues in some parts of Powys, it's not everywhere. So it doesn't, you know, the south of Powys, and quite rightly in Builth Wells, has got restrictions, but in other areas we haven't. So it is that balance around how can we make those steps forward, but not put that burden on our residents, but to do that in a different way. So we've tried to put in the budget what we feel is sensible and practical to take forward.
Thank you, Diane. You make a really valid point there around the corporate plan. It is reviewed on an annual basis. You know, maybe a recommendation from this could be towards a corporate plan is to understand the economic impact or the cost impact of potential plans and make sure that it's realistic and achievable. Thank you. Any other points about the budget at all? I just want to sum up quickly, really, and take your thoughts on what recommendations to go to Cabinet. We've talked quite a bit around risk and the heightened risk this year. We've heard the Section 151 officer you know, talk about the risk, and she says it's a manageable risk. Are we in agreement there, or it's hard to challenge the Section 151 officer because it's a special role, and it's independent of the council, really. So it's a view we must really respect. So it's a matter of taking on board what the Section 151 officer says and accepting that, but you know, in the knowledge that it is a more risky budget this year, and when you look at the FRM, it's not going to get any less risky over the next 3 or 4 years. What are your thoughts, members? I'd like to put something there on sustainable powers, the pace within the programme. I don't see it having great impact. Maybe is lessening the challenge, maybe, but it's hard to quantify that. And is something around the pace of change within Powys, Gareth?
Yes, just to build on that, Chair, I think what we agreed is try and quickly establish some key performance measures about how it's progressing, and also learn the lessons from the past, from the analysis, make sure that inputs and informs how we go forward.
No, I did want to talk about benchmarking, but we can leave that for another day.
Could I just comment on the progress and performance within Sustainable Powys? And we are arranging a session for Governance and Audit Committee, hopefully in the very near future. And you will see, you know, there's actually going to be a chart involved with that, showing you exactly what progress we made against each service. Yeah.
Well, this is highly coordinated the chair of Lynn. Would you like to have a comment on this, Lynn?
Thank you very much, Chair. And I promise Councillor David and I didn't actually choreograph this, but taking account of your comments on sustainable powers and the earlier discussion, Councillor David's quite right. Governance and Audit Committee is about to have a specific session, but I thought it was also worth bearing in mind, Chair, that SWAP, our internal auditors, are currently conducting an internal audit on the Sustainable Powers programme, and that if the finance panel is making recommendations to the cabinet in connection with the budget, there may be merit in framing one of those recommendations around the cabinet's cognizance going forward of internal audit assessment of sustainable powers, which hopefully the internal audit assessment will coalesce around some of the views that we've heard today. Anyway, I'd be surprised if it didn't, but it's still to be concluded.
Okay, no, that's good. Do you have an indication of timescales around that or not? So,
the internal audit, the field work has been concluded or is coming to an end, and Ian will be framing the report in consultation with the field work going forward. So I think it's probably going to be a few weeks, and of course internal audit reports have to go through the corporate leadership team before they come to us.
So it certainly won't be here before budget.
No. It's more likely to be March, April, I think.
Okay. No, but no, we could reference that. It's, you know, it's like painting the Forth Road Bridge, isn't it?
Yeah.
So it's continuous cyclical sort of a process, putting a budget together. No, thank you, Lynn, for drawing our attention to that. That could be a valuable bit of work. Right. But back to the recommendations. Is there any clear, strong recommendations to the cabinet around capital? And no, but in a way, it's a bit of keeping a watching brief, isn't it? Really, it's sort of a boring bit of recommendation, really. But I because I know you're doing it, Jane. So I don't think there's a real recommendation around the capital, but we need to acknowledge the risk contained within this budget and the pace of the sustainable powers. So I think those are the two main areas, unless somebody's going to add to that.
I think the only thing about risk in the capital programme was about the interest rates and the cost of the revenue to the revenue budget of servicing that capital investment, you know, and being very mindful of that.
Yeah, I did ask something a little bit around that with learning skills as well. That balance between, you know, the service delivery, the revenue, and the capital, and understanding that relationship, especially around education. So I think that's been covered by learning skills to some degree. Thank you, Gareth. If anything else, otherwise I'll close the meeting and try and hammer something out with Kath so we can respond to cabinet before next Tuesday. But David, you've heard most of our thoughts as well. So is there any final comment from you? No. Thank you very much, and thanks to all the officers, especially the ones here and the ones back in their offices, all working from home. Thank you all. Thank you very much indeed.